Hello, and thank you for choosing this full length, clean, historical Western romance by Kat Lynn. We are so happy to have you with us today. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Your support allows us to continue sharing these sweet, heartwarming stories for free. Now, relax and get ready to travel back in time to the American frontier, where we join an adventure to find love and happily ever after. Enjoy. Copyright of Kat Lynn, Colorado's Bride for the Other Brother by Kat Lynn. Chapter 1. Chicago, Illinois, 1870. Minnie cleaned the last of the dirty plates as she sighed in resignation. She could hear the animated chatter from the drawing room between her four brothers and her parents. Her elder brother William still wasn't home, and they'd had to have dinner without him. Minnie swallowed a jolt of irritation, realizing that she would have to warm his plate once more when he finally did arrive home. William owned one of the best creameries in town, but his carelessness and bad spending habits saw him make huge losses day after day. Fate had given Minnie 5 brothers, and each was as lazy as the last. William had shown a bit of zeal when he first opened the creamery, but that had quickly dwindled to nothing. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews' mercantile, had fallen on hard times as well, and they were now facing dire financial constraints. Minnie had thought this would jolt her brothers into action, but she was wrong. Now, all of them were looking up to her to save them from their predicament by marrying her off to a wealthy prospect. But so far, none had been forthcoming. "Good evening, family. See what I received by mail earlier today," William shouted in excitement as he burst into the house waving a newspaper in his hand. "What are you on about this time, Willie?" Hank, one of his younger brothers, asked, rolling his eyes. They were all used to William's antics, and this was probably just another one. "This is the Matrimonial Times. It's issued by a local Chicago matrimonial agency. It contains hundreds of ads from eligible bachelors from the West searching for mail-order brides from the East for marriage. Listen to this," he said as he flicked quickly through the newspaper, his face flushed with excitement. "A successful 30-year-old rancher in Kansas seeks a young lady for marriage and childbearing. She should be 5'6", of a pale complexion, can cook, clean, and learn how to milk cows." Minnie cringed from where she sat as they all turned to look at her. She looked at her parents, her eyes pleading with them to come to her aid, but they conveniently evaded their glances. This was so unfair, she thought. Why was she the only one expected to make sacrifices for her family? Upset, she stood up and made as if to go back to the kitchen. "Hey, where are you going? I want to you present as I read a couple more ads. Who knows, you might just like the sound of one of them," William said, and Minnie knew better than to get into it with him. She timidly walked back to her seat. "Yeah, Willie, she has to stay here and tell us what chores she can perform out west. I know she can cook and clean, but can she milk a cow?" Hank said sheepishly and drawing a few laughs from around the table. "Leave your sister alone, Hank," Mr. Andrews admonished his young son. He knew what they were asking of Minnie was unfair, but he could see no other way out. Mrs. Andrews sat quietly by her husband's side, her gaze cold and distant. She didn't like what was happening either, but she was helpless to stop it. "Well, back to what I was saying," William said as he read out more ads, and some were so ridiculous, sending everyone at the table into pearls of laughter. All of them, apart from Minnie, who sat quietly as she watched her family make a debacle out of her life. "What do you think, Minnie? Did you like any of them?" "There are 100 others in there, but I can't continue reading as I'm tired and hungry," William said. "I didn't think anything of them, William. Let me go warm up your plate," Minnie said as she rose to go to the kitchen. "Thank you, Minnie. But I suggest you keep the newspaper for inspiration," William said as he passed the newspaper to his sister. Minnie reluctantly took it and placed it on her chair. And later on that night in her room, Minnie placed the newspaper under her mattress and vowed to forget about it. But try as she did, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The sheer number of the advertisements was shocking, to say the least. Why would the so-called eligible bachelors advertise for brides instead of finding them the good old-fashioned way through their acquaintances or chance meetings? Her deep-rooted traditions and religious beliefs made the entire arrangement of advertising seem the more strange and inappropriate. A hesitant knock at her door jolted her back from her musings, and she answered for the person to come in. "You can't fall asleep as well, dear?" her mother asked as she walked into the room. "No, Ma. I have so much running through my mind that I fear I could lose my mind any moment." Minnie answered, and the sadness in her voice tore her mother's heart. "I know, dearest, I know. But you are the only one who can save us now, and maybe with your leaving, your brothers will think of following suit. You have always had a good head on your shoulders, dearest. Your future is very bright," Mrs. Andrews answered. "Do you think so, Ma?" Minnie asked. "I know so, dear," her mother said, a warm smile on her lips. Long after her mother had left her room, Minnie pondered her future. She didn't agree with the whole mail-order bride arrangement, but she knew also that continuing to stay at home any longer wasn't going to benefit her in any way. She would try to find a suitor in Illinois, and if that fell through, then she could consider going out west. Tomorrow, her best friend Martha would be visiting, and maybe she could ask her what her thoughts were about the whole arrangement. Sleep was long in coming, and when it did, Minnie dreamed that she was an old maid, still at home, cooking and cleaning for her equally old and grumpy brothers. Chapter 2. Denver, Colorado, 1870. Luke paced impatiently in the small room he rented at the rundown boarding house in Denver, his mind running wild. It had been over an hour since his youngest brother was supposed to come to see him, but Greg was yet to show up. What if he had changed his mind? Luke wondered as panic tore through him. He only had a few pennies left to his name, and if Greg failed to show up, then all his well-thought-out plans would go down the toilet. This meant that he would go back to being poor and homeless, and he wasn't having that. He was tired of that life and was willing to do anything to be accepted back home by his brothers, especially his elder brother Storm. He had sought out his brother Greg sometimes back, intent on mending fences with his family. As the youngest, Luke knew that Greg was bound to listen to him without prejudice, as Greg had been young when Luke committed most of his atrocities. He could as well have forgotten most of them. Their first meeting had been a success, and during the second one, Greg told him that his brothers were willing to accept him back home if only he changed his vices. That was all the confirmation Luke had been waiting for, and he had an elaborate plan that would see him back home. A knock sounded at the door, and Luke could hear his heart pounding in his chest. Greg was finally here. This was it. He walked to the door in 2 long strides, unlocked it, and ushered his brother inside. "You gave me a fright there, Greg. I thought you weren't coming," Luke said as soon as his brother was inside the room. "I wouldn't fail you like that, Luke. There's a lot to do at the ranch now that I'm there all by myself," Greg answered. "I can't imagine that the big ranch house now has only you occupying it. Do you ever get lonely?" Luke asked, and Greg shrugged. "Oh yeah, I do sometimes, but I can visit our brothers any time I want. It's not so bad," Greg replied. "How is Violet?" Luke asked. He would be married and living with her happily now if he hadn't messed things up. "She is very happy with Storm," Greg answered, and an awkward silence followed. He was young when Luke's and Violet's story happened, but he could recall some of the unpleasantness it brought about, and he didn't want to talk about it now. "Well, here I am. You said we needed to discuss something urgent?" "Yes, we do. I need to come back home to my family, and for that, I'll need your help," Luke started. "That's all right, Luke. I'll take you to talk to them," Greg answered happily. "Talking won't help much. I need to do something that proves that I want to be a changed man," Luke answered, and Greg's eyes grew wide. "What do you need?" Greg asked. "I need to get married to a mail-order bride, just like I had initially wanted. But since I don't look anything like I did back then, I'd like you to communicate with the lady as well as post your photograph. One more thing, you should pretend to be fairly wealthy," he said. Greg was taken aback. What Luke was asking of him was simply not possible. Wasn't this a criminal offense, let alone dishonest? But Luke, How will the young lady feel when she finally finds out? She will be heartbroken, if anything, Greg answered. That will not happen. I only need her to come here and I will make it up to her. I'm going to be a changed man, Greg. You will see, Luke answered, his eyes pleading. This is too much you are asking from me. I'll need to go home and think about it, Greg said. Don't take too long, I beg you. And please, don't tell our brothers either. I want it to be a surprise, Luke answered. 2 days later, Greg was back at Luke's rented room bearing good news. Since the first day he'd spoken to Luke at the saloon, all he'd thought about was having all his brothers at peace. It was true that no lady worth her salt would agree to come to Denver for Luke. Many years of living on the streets and lack of proper meals had reduced him to a shell of his former self. But it would eventually do him good to have someone by his side. I will do it, but you have to promise that you will not let me down, Greg said as he sat on Luke's rickety bed. I promise. I've lived rough all those years and I can never go back to that life. After this, all of you will be proud of me, Luke said earnestly. Okay, you will need to work a little bit on yourself so you can be presentable when your bride arrives. Now, let's write down that ad and we can post it before day's end, Greg said, and Luke nodded in agreement. After Greg had written the ad, they both read it out loud until they were finally satisfied that it was short, precise, and to the point. He would fill in the rest of the details when he received a reply they both were happy with. Later that evening, they went to the postal exchange and placed the ad in the Matrimonial Times novelty newspaper. The hard work was now over, and the only thing remaining was to find their bride. All this time, Greg kept praying that Luke didn't let him down. But as all those doubts ran through his mind, something about Luke's demeanor was sincere, and Greg was sure that this time his brother was headed down the right path. Chapter 3. Minnie finished cleaning up after lunch and went up to her room, leaving her parents resting in the drawing room. She dropped heavily on her bed, brooding over her never-ending chores and wondering if this was all she was good for. A sharp knock rang out at her bedroom door, and she warily answered for the person to come in. It was her best friend Martha. Minnie had forgotten that Martha was paying her a visit that day and was pleasantly surprised by her arrival. She was the same age as Minnie, but she was happily married to a local gentleman, and they had 2 children. Martha always felt that had Minnie been less choosy, she would also be happily married and with her own family. Your ma said I would find you here, Martha said as she walked into the room, the long skirts of her dress swirling wildly behind her. It's so good to see you. How are the children, and how come you didn't bring them with you? Minnie asked as she motioned for her friend to sit by her side on the bed. They are fine. I left them at home with their father, Martha explained. Isn't he working today? Minnie asked. Not for the next couple of days. I'm very happy to have him helping at home, Martha explained, and Minnie felt a little envious of her friend. She seemed to have bagged herself the best husband. Great. There is something I want to show you, and I want your honest opinion, Minnie said, a serious look on her face. It must be serious, I see, Martha said. It is, Minnie replied as she reached under her bed and pulled out the Matrimonial Times newspaper. What is that? Martha asked, a puzzled look on her face. Minnie explained what the newspaper was all about to a shocked Martha who listened quietly without interrupting. Are you seriously considering going through with this, Minnie? Martha asked, looking her friend straight in the eyes. I don't really like it, but I feel I have to. I have thought about it a lot, and I can't see any other way of helping my parents, Minnie answered, a sad look on her face. There are still good men here in Chicago. I don't understand why you would want to travel that far to marry a man you haven't physically met. It's ridiculous, to say the least. Martha scolded her friend. I know, but I have no promising prospect here. It would take months before I find one, and even then, there are no guarantees. What will happen to my parents then? Minnie asked as her voice broke and tears glistened in her eyes. Don't cry, my friend, Martha said soothingly as she scooted over and gave Minnie a small hug. Let's have a look at the ads and see if we can find you a husband. They went over the ads for a while, and shortly, one caught their attention. It was from a gentleman rancher in Colorado. He sounded most sincere than most of the other ads. A gentleman rancher in Colorado seeks a young, intelligent lady for marriage. She should be willing to settle down on a ranch and be ready to adjust to our way of life. One of a worthy and noble character would be most appreciated. "I think we should write him," Martha exclaimed, seemingly more excited than her friend. "I think we should go through a few more before we decide," Minnie said, smiling through her tears. "Are you developing cold feet now?" Martha teased her. "No, but we shouldn't be in haste either. This is a lifetime decision and I can't afford to mess it up," Minnie replied. The young ladies perused through the ads for hours, but Minnie still couldn't make up her mind. It wasn't as easy as she had thought, and she was beginning to feel uneasy and doubted whether she could actually go through with it. She didn't voice her misgivings to Martha, as her friend was so eager to help. Eventually, the sun slowly started going over the horizon, and they both realized how late it was. Prosody rate of percent. "I have to get home to my family and get started with dinner," Martha said, realizing how late it was. "I have to get started with dinner as well. Thanks so much for being so helpful," Minnie said. "What are friends for? Just let me know when you find your perfect match." "I hope it will be soon," Martha said as they both walked from Minnie's bedroom towards the front door. Minnie waved her friend goodbye and went to the kitchen. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the gentleman in Colorado. His had been the most intriguing ad to her, and Martha had agreed as well. What was she waiting for? She thought. She jumped out of bed, walked over to her writing desk, and took out her stationery. Slowly, she began jotting down. "Dear Sir, I hope this letter finds you in good spirits. I read your ad with a lot of interest and felt a great need to write to you. I'm Minnie, and I live in Chicago, Illinois, with my parents and 4 brothers. I'm 22 years old. I can cook, clean, and sew. I hope to hear from you soon should you be interested. Yours sincerely, Minnie Andrews." She reread the letter a couple more times, making sure that she didn't sound too pushy or too eager and scare him away. Satisfied, she sealed the letter and promised herself to post it early the following morning before courage failed her. She wouldn't tell a soul until she received a reply from him, not even her best friend Martha, who hadn't been very keen on the idea to begin with. That way, she wouldn't be embarrassed if he never wrote her back. Chapter 4. Luke and Greg stared at the huge stack of letters they'd just collected from the postal exchange in disbelief. Was there such a shortage of husbands back east that all the ladies wanted to get married in the west? They had to start reading them now if they wished to get it done before dusk. Greg would have to go back home early that day, as his brothers had begun suspecting that he was up to something from his frequent trips to town. "This is an overwhelming response, Greg," Luke said as he adjusted his posture on the bed to look at his brother. "It is, and we need to get on with it. They are beginning to suspect my frequent visits to Denver," Greg answered. "But you haven't said anything to them?" Luke asked. "No, I haven't. I promised you I wouldn't until we are ready. But I hate lying to them like this," Greg answered. And from the look on his face, Luke could see that his younger brother was truly bothered. "I'm sorry, Greg, to have put you in this position, but it's for the best. You will see," Luke answered. "I hope so, brother. I really do." "Okay, let's get started," Greg answered as he picked up the first letter. They read each one's out loud, but most were so vague that the brothers started to wonder whether they would ever get one that was worth their time. Finally, Greg picked up one letter that was eloquently written and stood out from the others. It was from a young lady from Chicago named Minnie Andrews. He passed it over to Luke, and when he read it, his face immediately lit up. "She is the one, Greg," he exclaimed, waving the letter around in the air. "I think so too," Greg answered, fully convinced. "Let's reply to her now, Greg," Luke went on, almost jumping with excitement. "Okay, let's do it," Greg answered, a wide smile on his face. It gave him great pleasure to see Luke so happy. "Dear Minnie, I received your letter with a lot of joy and gratitude. My name is Luke, and I own a profitable ranch here in Colorado. I have enclosed my photograph so you can have an idea of whom you are corresponding with. I hope you send one too in your next letter. Yours sincerely, Luke Lucas. What do you think? Greg asked as he passed the letter over to Luke. It's great. Do you have the photograph with you? Luke asked. Yes, it's always in my pocket, Greg said as he reached into his back pocket and pulled out the photograph. They sealed the letter, and Greg agreed that he would post it early the next morning, as the postal exchange was already closed by that time. As he stood up to leave, Luke made him promise once again that he wouldn't say anything to their brothers until the timing was right. After Greg left, Luke stared at Minnie's letter and wondered how she looked like. She was only 22, and he was 32. He had asked Greg to conveniently omit that simple detail from his letter, as the photograph would have surely planted a seed of doubt in her. He walked over to the tiny mirror on the wall and stared at his face. It had improved considerably since he'd stopped downing mugs of ale like there was no tomorrow. Sleeping in a warm, albeit a bit uncomfortable bed had also helped a lot. His mind went back to how badly he had treated his first bride when she arrived and wished he could turn back the hands of time. He had been young and foolish at the time, but that was now a part of his past. He vowed to never treat any other lady that poorly. Still, it bothered him that he had to lie to get Minnie here, but hadn't had another choice. He would make it up to her when she came over and hoped she would be gracious enough to forgive him. He received her reply 3 weeks later, and as requested, she had sent him her photograph. She was breathtaking with a sweet oval face, almond-shaped eyes, and her lips were parted ever so slightly in a tiny smile. He couldn't wait to see her face to face. Soon enough, he proposed marriage, and she accepted. She would be arriving in Denver in a month's time. He was overjoyed. Greg, could you send her enough money to travel comfortably on the stagecoach? I will pay you back as soon as I get back on my feet, he requested his brother. I will be happy to, Luke, but I still think you shouldn't have lied that you own the ranch. You didn't even tell her about us, your brothers. I shudder to think what will happen when the truth comes out. She will hate me too for being your accomplice, Greg said and hung his head. You worry too much, Greg. I will kill her with so much love and kindness that she will forget we ever lied to her, Luke replied. I still say that you are too confident. Is it time to let the others know of our plans yet? Greg asked. Yes, please set up that meeting as you had planned earlier. It's time we let our brothers in on what we have been up to, Luke answered, and Greg was relieved. He had hated keeping their brothers in the dark, but it had been necessary for their plan to work. He still felt uneasy for having lied to the poor girl, but he felt that the end justified the means. She would one day understand why he did what he did and hopefully forgive him. As for his brothers, he hoped they would understand too that all he wanted was for their family to be whole again. Chapter 5. Minnie and Martha read the letter a few more times, giggling as they stared at his photograph. He was handsome in a rugged sort of way, and although they couldn't tell the color of his eyes, they looked warm and kind. Minnie couldn't believe he had actually written back, and it was all she could do to contain her excitement in front of Martha. I still can't believe you didn't tell me when you first wrote to him, Martha said, feigning disappointment. I'm sorry, but I explained why I didn't want anyone to know. What if he hadn't bothered to reply? I would have been humiliated. Minnie explained herself. There was no way he wasn't going to reply. Have a little faith, Martha said. Have you told your parents? There is nothing to tell. I still don't know what this means, Minnie replied. He is going to ask you to marry him. That's why he sent you his photograph so you can swoon over him, Martha said, and both girls burst out laughing. You think so? Minnie asked. Oh, I know so. Let's write him back and send him your photograph as well, Martha said as she rushed to Minnie's writing desk and pulled out the stationery. In a few minutes, Minnie had finished writing, enclosed the photograph, and Martha offered to post it on her way home. They wrote to each other a few more times, and in his last letter, Luke proposed to Minnie just like Martha had predicted. She accepted, and he asked her to travel to Colorado to marry him. She was happy that he owned his own ranch, and she couldn't wait to leave Chicago. It was time to break the good news to her parents as well as her siblings. She would do it that night after dinner, and she hoped her brother William would be present. It had been his idea after all. "I have an announcement to make," Minnie said at the dinner table. She was happy that everyone was around. "What is it, dear sister? Don't keep us waiting," Hank said in his usual haughty manner. "I'm going to Colorado to get married," she said, and waited for their reactions. "What? Have you now learned how to milk a cow?" Hank said, and their mother shot him a fierce look. He lowered his eyes and kept quiet. "No, Hank, I'm not going there to milk cows. I'm going to start my family, something you should be giving a lot of thought about as well." Minnie answered, and she saw her parents smile at her answer. "Well done, Minnie. I knew you could do this. I'm very proud of you," William said, the sincerity in his voice audible. "Yes, dear. This is very good news. Your mother and I give our blessings," her father, who'd been quiet all this time, said. He still felt awful for having forced this on his daughter, but it had to be done. He felt a little better as she seemed quite happy about traveling to Denver. "When do you leave?" her mother asked. "In 2 weeks," Minnie replied. "What is the man's name?" her father asked. "His name is Luke Lucas," she said as she reached into her pocket and brought out his photograph. It was passed around the table, and they all agreed that he was a pleasant-looking man. Later that evening, as she went to bed, Minnie passed by her parents' bedroom and thought she heard soft whimpers from inside. She inched closer to the door, and she heard her mother sobbing softly as her father tried to comfort her. "What kind of parents are we, Donald? We have succeeded in chasing our only daughter away," she sobbed. "It is going to be all right, Norma. Minnie is a strong-willed person just like you, and she will be okay," he said, but her mother kept on sobbing. Minnie's heart broke. She had no idea that her mother felt this strongly about the burden they had placed on her, and that she had blamed herself all this time. She wished she could walk into her parents' bedroom and reassure them that she was happy to leave, but she didn't want them to know that she had been eavesdropping. As she walked to her room, she vowed to make her life a success, and one day show her parents that her leaving home was not in vain. Minnie spent her last days in Chicago with Martha as they shopped for her long trip. Martha's husband had traveled on business, and she had taken her children over to her mother's so she could help Minnie with her big move. Luke had sent her enough money to buy herself new clothes for her journey and get a ticket to travel comfortably on the stagecoach. Martha couldn't stop gushing about how caring Luke was, and she was sure that her friend would be in very safe hands. The morning of her departure was the worst. Minnie's mother sobbed so hard that everyone thought she was going to be sick. Her father stood quietly next to his wife as he tried desperately to comfort her. Minnie could swear that she saw a teardrop from her father's eye. Her brothers stood nonchalantly next to the carriage, taking her to the station, and it was only William who showed some kind of emotion when the coach pulled away from the station. Minnie waved back as the figures grew smaller and smaller until they were no longer distinct. It was only then that her tears began to fall. She sobbed for her mother's agony as well as from the fear of the unknown. She was leaving all she ever knew to move west, to have a better life, and hopefully help her parents someday. Luke seemed wealthy from all the money he had splashed on her, and when they got married and got used to each other, she would tell him about her parents and possibly ask him to help them out financially. They would be his parents as well, after all. Chapter 6. Luke paced nervously around his small room as he waited for Greg to come and pick him up for their meeting with their brothers. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, he could see huge bags under his eyes. Since Greg told him 2 days earlier that their brothers wished to see him, he hadn't slept a wink. He was particularly nervous about meeting his elder brother Storm. He had been the one largely affected by his bad choices. Luke felt a bit of relief, though, that Storm still wished to meet with him and hear what he had to say. A gentle knock at the door roused him from his thoughts, and he answered for the person to come in. "Are you ready?" Greg asked after they exchanged the usual pleasantries. "As ready as I will ever be," Luke answered, and Greg could see how nervous he was. "Don't worry, they are anxiously waiting for you. It's going to be all right," Greg said, and gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. They walked out and went straight to where Greg's cart was. The ride back to the ranch was quiet as each was lost in his own thoughts. A few minutes later, they pulled into the drive, and Luke was filled with nostalgia as he was hit by the familiar smell of the ranch. The house was still as majestic as he remembered, and he now realized just how much he had missed this place. "Here we are," Greg said as they each jumped down from the cart. "This is it," Luke muttered under his breath, and Greg almost didn't catch it. They walked through the front door and down the long hallway, and Luke could hear his brothers engaged in a heated discussion in the drawing room. The room suddenly fell silent as soon as they walked in, and you could hear a pin drop. Storm was the first one to recover, and he stood up and walked towards his brother. "Luke, I'm so happy to see you after so many years," he said as he enveloped Luke in a huge bear hug. The two men broke into tears as they held each other tightly. They stood like that for a few minutes as their younger siblings looked on with tears in their eyes as well. "I'm so sorry, Storm. I'm so sorry," Luke kept saying through his tears. "It's okay, Luke. You are here now," Storm said as he hugged his brother even tighter. He was no longer the man Storm remembered. The man he held so tightly looked older than his age, and his eyes were sunken and sad. Storm could see that life had not been easy on his brother. It didn't matter. He was back at home now, and they would all nurse him back to his former self. The rest of his brothers, Thomas, Henry, and Eric, hugged Luke happily, delighted at seeing him again. They spent the rest of the day catching up, and finally Luke told them of their plan with Greg. "I hope this plan of yours doesn't backfire in your faces," Storm finally said. "It won't." "I'm not the same person I used to be back then," Luke replied, a determined look on his face. "Do you have a photograph of hers?" Thomas asked, looking excited. "Yes, I do," Luke said, as he reached into his pocket and brought out Minnie's photo and passed it around. They couldn't keep calm about how attractive she was. "We have to do this the right way for this to be a success," Storm said. "You will have to leave the boarding house and move in here with Greg." "You read our minds, Storm," Greg said as he looked at Luke, who couldn't believe that Storm was being this kind to him. He had been worried that Storm wouldn't welcome him back to the ranch house just yet. In the days that followed, Luke moved back into the ranch house and began preparing the spare room for Minnie's arrival. His sisters-in-law would prepare dinner for him and Greg in turns, and within a few weeks, he was beginning to look like his former self. He would busy himself working at the ranch to keep his mind away from misleading thoughts, and Storm was very proud of him. He had spoken to Mrs. Anderson about being his chaperone, and the old lady had only been too happy to help. She was particularly overjoyed that he had found his way back home. She had prayed that this would happen, and now her dream had come true. As the day of Minnie's arrival neared, Luke was filled with both excitement as well as apprehension in equal measure. How would she react when the cat was finally out of the bag? The only way to find out was to wait for her to arrive. All he knew was that he would do everything within his power to convince her that he had meant well. "She is arriving the day after tomorrow. How do you feel?" Greg asked him one evening after dinner. "I know, and I can't wait," Luke answered. But he didn't sound too convinced. "It will be fine, Luke. We have come this far. We can't give up now," Greg said. "When did you become this mature?" Luke teased his baby brother, and Greg smiled back at him. The night before Minnie's arrival was the most nerve-wracking for Luke. He tossed and turned in bed most of the night, and he was worried that he would look a mess if he didn't sleep at all. Different thoughts raced through his mind, and he would sleep for a while, then suddenly wake up with a start drenched in sweat. He was being haunted by his past demons, and he spent most of the night fighting them off. Chapter 7. The stagecoach stopped, and Minnie looked around at the sleepy town. It was nothing like Chicago, but it had its own different feel. People here dressed a bit differently and spoke differently as well. She stepped out of the dark interior of the stagecoach, and was suddenly hit by the sharp glare of Denver's sun. A huge gust of wind blew dust into her eyes, and she yelled out in pain as she reached into her pocket and removed a handkerchief. She dabbed at her eyes and managed to remove some of it. Chicago was neither this dusty nor this windy. "Miss Andrews?" a voice inquired behind her. She turned sharply and bumped hard into a tall gentleman. "Yes," she answered, wondering who this man was. "I'm Luke Lucas," he answered as Minnie stared at him in disbelief. "What? No, you are not Luke," she answered as she fumbled in her dress pockets. "Are you looking for something?" the gentleman asked. "Yes, I'm looking for Luke's photograph," Minnie answered as she glared at him. She suddenly realized that she must have left it in her suitcase. She had memorized his face since the first day she received the photograph, but she needed it to show this imposter that she knew who Luke was and it wasn't him. "Miss Andrews, please allow me to explain myself. I know where your confusion is coming from, but I really am Luke," he said. "How do you know my name to start with?" she said, looking around nervously, ready to scream if he dared touch her. "I know you because my younger brother Greg wrote you on my behalf," he answered, his eyes pleading with her to believe him. "What kind of a sick joke is this?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. Was this what Martha had warned her about, coming all this way to meet a man she hadn't physically met? Well, Martha had been right. She had been duped, and now she was standing in front of a total stranger who somehow claimed to know who she was. "Miss, please don't cry. Allow me to explain. I swear to you I mean you no harm," he said, and he saw her shoulders relax. "Where are your bags?" "Those two," she said, pointing to two bags lying near her feet, and he effortlessly picked them up. "Please follow me. I wouldn't harm you in front of all these people now, would I?" he said and smiled. Almost immediately, that smile transformed everything. Minnie realized how familiar he looked to the man in the photograph. She followed him closely behind, her mind in turmoil. If what he was saying was true, why hadn't he sent his own photograph? He had promised to explain everything, so she would wait and hear what he had to say. They crossed the road and stopped near a contraption that almost resembled a carriage but was far from it. He placed her bags on the back bench and turned to look at her. "Miss, have you ever ridden a cart?" he asked, and she nodded no. "Well then, there is a first time for everything," he said as he walked to the other side and hoisted himself onto the cart. He stretched out his hand towards her. "Give me your hand, I will help you up." She reluctantly gave out her hand, and he pulled her up. Something about him made her feel safe, and she couldn't explain why. "Where are we going?" she asked as soon as she settled down next to him. "We are going to the ranch. My brother Greg is there, and we will both explain everything to you," he answered as he tugged on the reins and the horses pulled the cart forward. As they rode silently out of town, Minnie watched him from the corners of her eyes. He was quite attractive, and apart from looking a bit older, he was an exact replica of the photograph she had in her suitcase. He was calm and kind when talking to her, making her feel comfortable in an awkward situation. Luke could feel Minnie's eyes burning into him when she thought he wasn't looking, and smiled inside. He understood her confusion and was pleasantly surprised that she hadn't acted in a totally different way. He regretted not bringing Greg with him, as this would have made it easier for him to explain her doubts. She was more attractive in person and well poised. He could tell she had been brought up well, and he couldn't be happier. This was exactly the kind of lady he was looking for, and he couldn't wait to show her off to his brothers. "We are almost there," he said, but he was met with a cold stare. He couldn't blame her. Greg had warned him that this would happen. What if she never forgives him and decides to go back to Chicago? He would do everything to make sure that didn't happen. The fact that she had come this far with him showed that she had a little trust in him, and that was a good sign. "Here we are," he said as they turned into the driveway. She didn't answer him, but he could feel her looking around the ranch. He stopped the cart, got off, and helped her down as well. He picked up her bags from the back bench and proceeded towards the front door, assuming that she was following behind. He looked back, and to his utter dismay, she was standing in the same spot, rooted to the ground. "Miss, please come inside with me," he implored. but she didn't budge. Minnie was overcome by a paralyzing fear that she was being led to her doom. She feared that if she went into the house, she was never coming out. Suddenly, all her strength drained from her, and she sank to the ground, weeping bitterly. Luke rushed back to her, dropped to his knees next to her, and slowly pulled her close to him. She leaned a little into him, and Luke let her weep as he held her tightly in silence. Atrocity rate was 7%. Chapter 8. It took quite a while to calm her down, and when she did, Luke slowly coaxed Minnie into going inside the house with him. He slowly helped her up, and leaving the luggage lying on the ground, held her hand, and together they walked into the house. As they went through the long hallway, Minnie noticed how neat and clean everything was. It took her by surprise that a man could single-handedly clean up that well. Delicious aromas wafted from a direction she could only assume was the kitchen, making her aware of how ravenous she was. Suddenly, the house didn't seem quite as imposing as it had earlier, and a sense of calmness settled in her heart. "Here we are," Luke said to no one in particular as they walked into a modestly furnished drawing room. He led Minnie to a couch and she sat down. "Let me go back for your luggage." Left alone in the room, Minnie studied her surroundings carefully. While the house looked a bit dated, it was well kept, with its freshly painted walls and elegant drapes gracing the huge windows. So far, Luke had told her that she would be meeting his younger brother who had been communicating with her, but seeing how well placed everything was, she couldn't help but wonder whether a woman's touch was involved. "You must be Miss Andrews." A cheerful voice called from the doorway, catching Minnie by surprise. She turned to look, and walking into the room, a huge smile on her wrinkly face, was a pleasant-looking elderly lady. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Minnie Andrews," she answered, smiling back at the lady, unable to help herself. "Oh, you poor dear, you must be exhausted and starving after such a long journey." The elderly lady chimed in again, and Minnie couldn't help but marvel at her charming persona. "Yes, I am, ma'am. It was quite a long trip," Minnie answered, smiling. It was hard not to in front of this lady. "Another one of my boys has found himself another rare jewel. I'm Mrs. Anderson," the woman gushed as she walked towards Minnie, her arms stretched out. Minnie instinctively walked into Mrs. Anderson's arms. They embraced, and it felt like they'd known each other for ages. What had the lady meant when she said another one of her boys? Minnie wondered. "I see you two have already met," Luke said as he walked back into the room, placing the two bags on the floor. Minnie looked much more relaxed now, and there was even a hint of a smile on her lips. She was a far cry from the lady who had collapsed outside the house, overwhelmed by fear, and Luke knew this was all because of Mrs. Anderson's loving and welcoming nature. A sense of sadness ran through him when he realized that his actions had not only hurt his brothers, but also this sweet, kind old lady who loved him like a son. "Yes, we have," Mrs. Anderson said, smiling happily at Luke, who walked over to her and placed a loving kiss on her cheek. If only a kiss could heal the hurt he had put everyone through over the years, he thought. "Miss, this is our longtime family friend and mother figure. She will be our chaperone until we get married," he said, and Minnie nodded her understanding. "Where is Greg, Mrs. Anderson?" "Out on the ranch, but he is due back any minute now," Mrs. Anderson replied. "In that case, would you like to perhaps freshen up first, rest a bit, and then join us later for dinner?" Luke asked, turning to Minnie. "Yes, that would be fine," Minnie answered. "I will personally come and fetch you from your room when dinner is ready," Mrs. Anderson said as she turned and walked back to the kitchen. She moved very fast for someone her age, Minnie thought amused, as she watched the elderly lady disappear into the kitchen. Pro 7%. "I will show you to your room then," Luke said as he picked up both bags and, with Minnie closely behind him, walked upstairs to the room she set aside for her. He opened the door, walked inside, and placed the bags in the corner. He walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains. Bright light flooded the room, and as with the rest of the house, the walls shone from the fresh paint and the floors were scrubbed clean. He opened the large windows, and fresh, crisp air filled the room. He then turned to Minnie and said, "You are safe here, miss. You have absolutely nothing to worry about." He was referring to her earlier breakdown, and Minnie's cheeks turned crimson. How could she have broken down like that in front of him? "I'm sorry for having acted in such a childish manner," Minnie apologized, unable to look him in the eye. "You don't need to apologize for anything, miss. I would probably have acted the same way under similar circumstances," he said, and smiled at her. "Thank you," she said. It was all she could mumble as Luke smiled knowingly and walked out of the room, locking the door behind him. Left alone in the room, Minnie began unpacking her bags, carefully arranging her clothing in the small wardrobe. While the room was a tad smaller than the one she had back in Chicago, it was tastefully furnished, making it warm and welcoming. With time, she knew she would grow fond of this place. The elderly lady had been God sent. All the feelings of doom she had when she'd arrived evaporated the moment Mrs. Anderson spoke to her. Her aura reminded Minnie so much of her mother back in Chicago. Minnie's heart broke when she remembered her mother's anguish on the day of her departure. A lone tear snaked its way down her cheek, and she hastily wiped it away. Chapter 9. The sharp knock at the door roused Minnie from her nap. She woke up with a start, confused at first about where she was. She rubbed her bleary eyes with the back of her hand as it finally dawned on her where she was. She answered for the person to come, and Mrs. Anderson burst into the room in haste. "What's happening? I have been knocking at the door for ages, dear," she said as soon as she was inside the room. "I'm sorry, I must have fallen asleep," Minnie answered and let out a long yawn. "Dinner is ready. Should we go down?" Mrs. Anderson asked as she sat down on the bed next to Minnie. "I'll have to brush my hair first. Maybe you should go and I will be right behind you," Minnie said, but Mrs. Anderson was having none of it. "No way am I leaving without you. I'll brush your hair for you if you don't mind," she offered. Mrs. Anderson brushed Minnie's hair slowly as she complimented her on how shiny and soft it was. Minnie thanked her and went to check herself in the mirror. Her dress wasn't wrinkled that much from her short nap, and her face still looked fresh. "I'm now all done," she said, and Mrs. Anderson made a happy sound with her mouth. "Then let's go," she said, and they both walked out of the door. As they neared the drawing room, Minnie could hear two men speaking in a moderate tone, and her heart skipped a beat. She was about to meet the man she had been in communication with all the time she was in Chicago. A hint of anger went through her once again. Luke should have written her himself, instead of passing himself off as his younger brother. "Welcome, miss," Luke said as she walked into the room behind Mrs. Anderson. He felt as if someone had knocked the wind out of him when she walked into the room. Her blonde hair cascaded well over her shoulders and framed her small oval face perfectly. Her dress fitted her slender body to perfection, and where the shawl wasn't covering her skin, it was smooth and milky white. She seemed unaware of the effect she had on him as she smiled and let him lead her to her seat. "Thank you," she said as she sat down, and her eyes fell on Greg for the first time. The man staring back at her was a spitting image of his brother, only that he was younger. They had the same eyes, the same facial features, and when he smiled, Minnie realized why Luke's smile had been a source of comfort for her. She had stared at that smile on the photograph he had sent her so many times that she had grown accustomed to it. "Miss Andrews, this is my brother Greg." Luke introduced them, and Minnie immediately saw the look of discomfort on Greg's face. It was obvious that he was feeling awkward just as much as she had earlier at the station. "It's very nice to meet you, Miss Andrews," Greg said, still not quite able to look her in the eyes. He could appreciate, though, that she was very beautiful, and Luke was quite smitten with her. It hadn't all been for nothing after all, he mused. "And I you," she answered and smiled at him reassuringly. She needed him to know that she wasn't angry with him. She could tell that he had been most probably convinced by his older brother to go with the ruse, given his young age. "Well, everyone, I hope you enjoy the meal. I went through a lot of trouble to prepare it, so you know," Mrs. Anderson said. After dinner, which was a rather quiet affair, Greg and Mrs. Anderson excused themselves to go to bed. Luke invited Minnie to the fireplace, and they sat quietly for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. "What do you think of my brother, Miss?" Luke finally asked. He seems very nice. Perhaps a bit too quiet, but nice, she answered. He is anything but, Luke said and smiled. Oh, Minnie said. Yes, plus cent. I think he feels that you might be angry with him about how we hatched this plot to bring you here, he answered. I was angry at first, but not anymore. I hold no grudge towards him whatsoever, she said. He will be relieved to know that, he replied. An awkward silence followed as they watched the burning orange embers slowly begin to die down. Minnie couldn't believe that she was now here seated next to him and feeling relaxed. As much as she had been filled with doubts earlier on, it was now crystal clear that everything he had told her since they met was the honest truth. Why didn't you write me yourself? She asked, catching him by surprise. I couldn't. I was scared that I won't know what to say to you, he answered. But you have done very well this far, she teased him, but he seemed not to get it. I was scared too that you'd find out that I was a bit older and reject me, he said, and she thought she saw a look of sadness cloud his face. You are not that old, she said and smiled at him warmly. You think so? He asked, her smile disarming him. Yes, but you have to stop calling me miss. That makes you sound old, she said, the smile still on her face. I didn't realize. How would you rather I addressed you? He asked, now amused. Minnie, even old Mrs. Anderson caught on earlier than you, she answered, and they both burst out laughing. They sat there a while longer, until the fire finally burned out. Luke was happy that she was now starting to feel at home, but knew that he wasn't out of the woods yet. There was still a lot that he hadn't told her about himself. He didn't know how she was going to handle the whole truth when it was finally out. Chapter 10. Life at the ranch wasn't as bad as Minnie had earlier envisioned. Luke would be out most of the day, but Mrs. Anderson was always there to keep her company. They would cook, clean, and spend the rest of the day regaling each other with tales about their past escapades. Do you regret coming here the way you did? Mrs. Anderson asked Minnie one afternoon as they sat outside on the porch. Not anymore. I understand why Luke did what he did, she answered. I'm glad to hear that. I know you are going to love it here, Mrs. Anderson said. But she couldn't help but wonder whether Luke had been forthcoming about his past with Minnie. She had a nagging feeling that Minnie didn't know much about the Lucas brothers' past. Mrs. Anderson could only hope that Luke would tell Minnie the truth before it was too late. Is something the matter, Mrs. Anderson? Minnie asked, noticing the somber look on the other woman's face. No, dear. I'm thinking of how much I'm going to miss you once I go back to my place, she answered. Oh, I'm going to miss you as well, but we will be visiting each other, won't we? Minnie replied, and Mrs. Anderson nodded in agreement. That evening after dinner, Greg got the cue from Mrs. Anderson, and they both went to their rooms, leaving Minnie and Luke alone in the drawing room. Luke knew what he wanted to ask her, but he was conflicted on whether the timing was right. He had come from the church earlier that afternoon, and the priest had assured him that everything was in place for his wedding. How do you like it here? Luke asked, trying to break the ice. It's not as bad as I had imagined, she answered. Then this is the perfect time to ask you, Luke said, his face now serious. Ask me what? She asked, beginning to get worried. Luke got up from his chair and walked over to her. He knelt before her and took her hand in his. His touch sent shock waves throughout her whole body. She shifted uneasily in her chair, embarrassed to have reacted to his touch in that way. Will you marry me? He asked, his eyes pleading earnestly with her. Of course I will marry you. I wouldn't have it any other way. Minnie answered and knew in her heart that she had strongly fallen in love with this man, and she wanted nothing more than to be his wife. I will invite my brothers and their families tomorrow for dinner to celebrate our engagement. We will get married on the day after, he said, and saw the look of surprise on her face. You have other brothers apart from Greg? She asked, a look of bewilderment on her face. She had been led to believe that Greg was his only brother, and now Luke was admitting to having others. How many secrets did this man harbor? I have 4 more brothers. Our eldest brother is called Storm. They all live within the ranch with their families, and I knew we would all eventually meet, he explained. You should have told me about them earlier, she answered, a hint of sadness in her voice. I'm sorry if I have offended you. I just thought the timing wasn't right, Luke explained, knowing that he sounded ridiculous even to himself. Why hadn't he told her the whole truth on their first night? He admonished himself. The following day, Minnie and Mrs. Anderson busied themselves around the house as they made sure everything was ready and in place for the family dinner that evening. Minnie wasn't particularly looking forward to it. There was a heaviness she couldn't explain in her heart. It was the same feeling she'd had when she first arrived at the ranch house. A little while later, their guests started arriving, and before long, everyone was gathered around the dining table, happily enjoying their meals. Do you have other siblings, Minnie? Storm, the eldest brother, asked. He seemed quite nice, and Minnie had liked him right away. Yes, I do. I have one older brother and 4 younger brothers, she answered. You will fit in perfectly with us here. As you can see, we are also quite a large family, Storm said. What about your parents? Storm asked. My ma and pa live at home with my brothers as well, she answered. Aren't your brothers a little too old to be staying at home with your parents? Thomas asked, and Storm kicked him under the table. That is rude, Thomas, Eric said, as the others gave Thomas disapproving looks. Minnie thought how familiar all this looked to scenes from her home, and a smile escaped her lips. Storm was right after all. She was going to fit in nicely here. Everyone chatted around the table animatedly as they all welcomed Minnie into their fold. As all this was happening, Minnie would catch Luke staring somewhat strangely at Storm's wife, Violet, and she couldn't quite understand why. Violet would catch Luke staring at her, and from where Minnie sat, she could tell that she wasn't happy with the attention. This went on until it was time to leave. As they all bid each other farewell, Violet was painstakingly trying to avoid any kind of contact with Luke. As she lay in her bed that night, Minnie's mind drifted to the strange scenes she had witnessed between Luke and Storm's wife, Violet. The other family members enjoyed each other's company, but not those two. She would ask Luke about it after the wedding tomorrow, and hopefully she would receive a satisfactory answer. Chapter 11. Luke and Minnie's wedding was held the following day at the small-town church. It was largely a family affair, as most of the townsfolk refused to believe that Luke had changed his ways and chose to stay away. Others were still bitter over wrongs he'd done to them, and they also chose to boycott the wedding. Regardless, the ceremony went on without a hitch, and after the exchange of vows, they all went back to the ranch for the wedding party. As the rest enjoyed their food and drinks, Minnie pulled her new husband aside. She had sensed the same tension between Violet and Luke today as well, and she couldn't wait any longer to get some answers. You are not enjoying the party, my love? Luke asked, noticing the serious look on her face. No, the party is great. Actually, I really enjoyed the whole day. I just have a pressing question that I need clarity on, she said. What is it? He asked. I noticed a lot of tension between you and Storm's wife yesterday during dinner. I still sense some of it now. Should I be worried? Minnie asked, her eyes fixed on his face. No, there is nothing wrong. You must have mistaken what you thought you saw, Luke said, his heart beating so wildly in his chest he worried she could hear it. You would tell me if there was something, anything at all, she said. Yes, I definitely would. Luke answered, thinking to himself that this was another lie he was adding to his cap. They went back to the party, where the family continued to congratulate them and wish them well. Minnie missed her parents and wished they had been present on this day. Her father would have proudly given her away to her groom, while her mother would have spent the whole day fussing over her. She wondered how they were doing and said a little prayer for them. She didn't give much thought to her brothers. They had only been too glad to see her leave and only wanted what she could provide for them. It was almost dark when everyone started leaving for their homes, and a little while later, only the newlyweds, Mrs. Anderson and Greg, were left at the ranch house. It had been a long day, and they were all exhausted and longing to go to bed. I can't stay awake any longer, Mrs. Anderson announced, stifling a yawn. Me neither, Greg said as he got up and began stretching about. Well, it's good night, everyone, from me, Mrs. Anderson said as she got up and went up to her room. I'm going to bed as well. I can't keep my eyes open any longer, Greg said and followed suit. We should as well go to bed, Luke said as he walked over to Minnie and kissed her gently on the forehead. Yes, I think we should, she answered, smiling warmly at him. He walked her to her door and she went inside, closing the door behind her. Luke lingered outside the door for a short while before proceeding down to his room. Violet tossed and turned as she lay in bed next to her husband. Since Luke arrived back at the ranch, her whole being had been unsettled. She was happy for Luke and his brothers as she knew they had wished for a long time to have him back home. But his sudden return had reminded her of the events that occurred years earlier and had caused her so much heartache. Her loving husband was blissfully unaware of how affected she was by the whole situation, and she had decided not to let him know how she really felt. Storm would graciously allow her to go and cook dinner for Luke and Greg, never knowing how uncomfortable the whole scenario made her. She would dash into the house, hurriedly prepare supper, and then rush back home before Luke came back from his errands. When she heard that he planned to get married to a mail-order bride, her heart had gone out to the poor girl. She didn't believe in all the talk about Luke was now being a changed man. As the days went by, she'd observed him gradually regain his health, and he was soon back to his former self. This made his brothers, especially Storm, very happy. It all came to a head when they were invited for dinner at the ranch house to meet Luke's fiancée before the wedding. Luke had spent most of the evening staring at her, making her feel very uncomfortable. The young girl he was to marry seemed pleasant enough, and Violet was sure that she had noticed how Luke was staring at her. She had thought of telling her husband, but hastily decided against it to keep the peace. However, she would not hesitate to put Luke in his place should he continue with his weird antics. What could he possibly want from her? Violet wondered as she slowly drifted off to sleep. Luke willed sleep to come, but all his efforts were proving futile. He wanted to kick himself for having been so obvious during dinner the night before. He was mostly disturbed that Minnie had caught him staring at Violet. He knew how it must have looked, but that certainly wasn't the case. Seeing Violet looking so radiant and happy after so many years simply took him by surprise. He had treated her with so much disdain that the guilt he felt when he saw her now was more than he could handle. All he needed was a couple of minutes with her so he could properly apologize to her. He would have to explain everything to Minnie before seeking Violet out. That way, Minnie would no longer be suspicious of him, and the guilt he carried in his heart would ease. His life was finally coming together, and he was not prepared to do anything that would jeopardize that. He hadn't bargained on the situation turning out this difficult when he was planning his comeback, but the hard work was over. Now all that remained was to tie the loose ends, and everything would fall into place. Chapter 12. Minnie found it a bit difficult and lonely adjusting to life at the ranch after Mrs. Anderson's departure. Luke and Greg would leave the house early in the morning and wouldn't be back until dusk and sometimes even after dark. She understood that there was much to do at the ranch, but she would find herself wondering why Luke wouldn't hire a ranch hand or two to help out. It was not like he couldn't afford to, with all the wealth he had told her about in his letters. Most of her days were spent cooking and cleaning around the house, something she was already accustomed to. On this particular day, she planned to go to town as the food in the larder was almost finished. She had taught herself how to drive a cart during her free time, and she had driven herself to Denver a couple of times before. She arrived in town at around noon and tied the mule to a nearby tree before walking across the street to Bart and Bro Groceries. As she entered, a couple of ladies who were on their way out exchanged glances and slowed down. Minnie was used to being given dirty looks and talked about as she was new in town. She had long discovered that folks here in Denver didn't take kindly to new faces, especially those who came over as mail-order brides. Old maids were particularly the harshest and the meanest-spirited of creatures. Minnie was so engrossed in her shopping that she didn't realize that the two ladies were on the aisle opposite hers. "She is his latest victim, I hear," one of the ladies started. "She is lucky she got married. He dumped his first fiancée, who was eventually married by the eldest brother after he took pity on her," the other one continued. "I don't think she will last long. Very soon, he will go back to his evil ways and she will be left all alone," the first lady sneered. "It's so sad to be married to a crook." "Maybe she will marry the youngest brother. He is still single," her friend answered, and they broke out into a loud, sarcastic laugh. Seeing that she'd noticed them, they both hurriedly left the grocery store, throwing dirty looks at her. Minnie's hands were trembling so much that she couldn't pick up any more groceries. She paid for the ones she already had in her basket and hurriedly walked back to where her cart was. As she furiously rode back home, tears rolled freely down her cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. She still couldn't believe what she had heard. It was all now beginning to make sense. As she waited for Luke to come back home, her mind went back to all the small things she had noticed but didn't pay much attention to. Luke had brought her here using lies, and she doubted anything he had ever told her was true. Luckily for her, Greg was out of town on a business trip. There was no perfect time than this to confront Luke. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Luke asked when he walked into the dimly lit room, unaware of the storm that had been slowly brewing inside Minnie for the better part of the afternoon. "Has anything you've ever told me true?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "What do you mean?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "I asked you about Violet and you didn't tell me the truth," she said. Luke just stared at her, lost for words. "How did she find out? You have a questionable past, but you failed to mention that as well. Were you planning to bring me here so you can make a laughingstock out of me?" she asked as tears pooled in her eyes and slowly began to spill over. "No, Minnie, please listen to me. You are making all this sound worse than it is. Give me time to explain, please," he begged, but she wasn't listening. "I should have listened to my friend and never came to this place," she yelled. "Please, Minnie, it isn't like that." "Please let me explain," he begged, but she was too angry to listen to him. She ran up to their bedroom and locked the door behind her. She then pulled out one of her bags from under the bed and started throwing items of her clothing inside. Luke was banging on the door, begging to be let in, but Minnie continued packing, oblivious of his pleas. In her fury, she realized that she didn't know where to go that late at night, but continued with her packing. She planned to leave in the morning, find a place to stay for a few days, before she arranged for her trip back home. She had some money left over from her trip coming here. She would use that to pay for a room, and the rest she would use to buy a ticket back home. Luke slept on the couch that night. He had spent the better part of the night begging Minnie to let him inside the bedroom to no avail. This was what he had feared would happen, and he had a sinking feeling that Minnie wouldn't want to listen to anything he had to say. He must have fallen into a deep sleep because when he woke up, bright sun rays were streaming in through the windows. He knew instantly that he had overslept, but he didn't care. His first priority was to go find Minnie and explain himself. He raced up the stairs and knocked gently on the door. There was no answer, and he assumed that she was still sleeping, which was unlike her. He pushed the door, and it sprung open. It was deathly quiet inside, and it only took him a minute to realize what had happened. Minnie had packed up all her belongings and left. Chapter 13. Minnie looked around the small room she rented at the boarding house, and tears of bitterness streamed down her cheeks. A few months ago, she had been a proud wife, in love with her husband and looking forward to what the future had in store for her. But now here she was, alone and living in a dilapidated building. The next stagecoach back home was weeks away, and she wondered how she would survive until then. Her heart ached, and she missed the place she had grown to love and called home in the short time she had been here. She walked over to the window and looked outside. People milled about as they went about their business, oblivious of her heartache. Her mind went back to the night of their fight. She began to wonder whether she had acted hastily, and she could have listened to what Luke had to say in his defense. But she had been so blinded by her anger that she didn't want to hear anything he had to say. She remembered the anguish in his face as he pleaded with her to listen to him, and the pain in her heart grew worse. She loved him deeply, but the lies had become too much. Had he been forthcoming with her, then she wouldn't have taken the news as hard as she did. To make matters worse, everyone in town knew his story, and she was the only one who had been kept in the dark. Minnie felt she had no choice but to go back home to her family in shame. But still, a part of her was undecided. If she traveled back home, then she would never see Luke again. The thought of never seeing him again filled her with so much dread that she collapsed on her bed, her whole body racked in sobs. A sharp knock at the door jolted her back to reality. She quickly wiped away her tears and went to open the door. Luke stood there, nervously twirling his hat around in his hands. "Please, may I come in? You need to hear my side of the story," he blurted out. Minnie stepped to the side, and he walked into the room. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Start from the beginning, if you will," Minnie answered, and she went to stand by the window, her back to him. Seeing him standing there at the door had thrown her off balance, and it was all she could do not to jump into his arms. Luke told her the whole story about how he'd messed up his life years back and how much he had suffered when he had been estranged from his brothers. He made sure not to leave anything out. Minnie listened without interrupting him, and by the time he was finished narrating his story, her handkerchief was completely soaked in her tears. "Why didn't you tell me all this from the moment we met?" she asked as she walked towards where he sat. "I was a fool and scared that you would reject me," he answered, his head bowed in shame. "So there is no money and the house isn't entirely yours?" she asked. "There is no money. I came back with only the clothes on my back. The ranch house was our parents' and it now belongs to all of us," he answered. "What about Violet?" she asked. "She is very happy with Storm. I only wish to speak to her and ask for her forgiveness is all," he answered, and Minnie knew he was being truthful. "You're sure you have not left anything else out? I don't want any more surprises," she said. "No, nothing else, I promise. What do you say we go back home now? The house just isn't the same without you," he asked, some of the color coming back to his face now that the truth had been revealed. "Well, I don't know. Let me think about it." She pretended to be in deep thought, and Luke knew she was joking. He picked up her bags, and together they walked out of the shoddy boarding house. They arrived back home to be greeted by an excited Greg. The news of Minnie's departure had hit him hard, and he blamed himself partially for having been involved in the lie. Seeing them now come back home, hand in hand, he knew that they had resolved their differences. "I'm so happy that you are back home, Minnie," Greg told her that evening after they'd had dinner. "I'm happy to be back with my husband and you," she answered with a warm smile. They spent the rest of the evening chatting away until Greg excused himself to go to bed. Left alone in the drawing room, Luke coaxed Minnie over to the fireplace. He placed a rug on the floor and pulled her down next to him. They sat close together in silence, each reminiscing about the events of the past few weeks. They were both at peace now that they were in each other's arms, and they knew that they belonged together. "I lost my mind when you left. Don't ever do that to me again," Luke said. "My heart broke into pieces when I left. I can't imagine my life without you now," Minnie responded. "I will never keep anything else away from you. Be it good or bad," Luke promised. "That is all I ask of you," Minnie said. They sat close together for a few more minutes, happy to be in each other's arms. When the fire burned out, it was time to go to bed. It had been a long, nerve-wracking, and tiring day. They stood up from the fireplace and, holding hands, walked upstairs to their bedroom. Chapter 14. Minnie and Luke blissfully went about their days, transforming the ranch house to its former, lost glory. They would occasionally invite the rest of the family for lunches and dinners, which were always well attended. Luke received a loan from each of his brothers, and he invested it all on the ranch. He bought more cattle, more horses, and soon his ranch was one of the best in the area. Minnie supported him fully, and he usually remarked that he couldn't have put in so much effort had it not been for her. One afternoon, as Minnie sat on the porch, marveling at how beautiful the ranch was, a strange cart pulled into the driveway, and a balding, stout gentleman alighted. She couldn't quite place where she had seen him, but his face was familiar. He walked with a slight limp as he came towards where Minnie sat. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Lucas. I have a letter for you," he said as he reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a white envelope. It then hit Minnie where she had seen him. He ran errands for the postal exchange. "Thank you," Minnie said as she took the letter from him. He then turned and walked back to his cart and rode back towards Denver. Minnie slowly opened the letter, her heart racing. She saw it was from her brother William. "My darling sister, I hope this letter finds you in high spirits. We are all fine here, but still facing dire financial constraints. Pa has been sick with a fever, and he needs money to visit the town's physician. Ma is taking good care of him. We would highly appreciate your help. We miss you terribly and hope that you and your dear husband pay us a visit soon. Your dear brother, William A." Tear dropped on the letter as she finished reading. It broke her heart that her parents were suffering that much to a point of lacking money for treatment. If only William had been serious about his creamery business, then their lives would have been bearable. He chose instead to squander the little he made and then shamelessly turn to her for help. That evening when Luke came home, Minnie showed him the letter. She had told him that her parents were suffering, but he hadn't thought it was to that extent. He saw the tears pooling in her eyes as he read the letter and knew that she wouldn't be at peace until her father was treated. "Don't worry, my love, I have some money saved. It will be enough to get your father treated," he said, drawing her into his arms to comfort her. "I hope it reaches them in time," she said. "Have faith. Your mother is taking good care of him. He will be okay," he reassured her. "Will this set you back financially?" she asked. "No, it won't. Don't worry," he said, but his mind was racing. He was to use the money to brand his cattle, but the agony in Minnie's eyes was too much to ignore. They sent the money the following day, and a month later, William wrote back and said that Mr. Andrews had been treated and was now healed. From then on, Luke would set some money aside every month, and it would be sent to her parents. During one of their many family dinners at the ranch house, Storm said that he had an announcement to make. No one knew what he wanted to say, not even his wife Violet. "I have been thinking about this issue for quite a while, and the more I think about it, the more I feel that it's the right decision to make," he began. "Tell us what it is. Don't keep us guessing," Thomas pushed his brother. "I have decided that Luke should be the one to stay at the ranch house with his family. We can all agree that he has done a good job and has returned it to its former lost glory," he said. A short silence followed before all at the dinner table erupted into wild cheers. Luke had proven to them that he was a changed man, and they all agreed there was no one better to stay on than him. The man of the moment, Luke, sat quietly without uttering a word. He'd heard what his elder brother had said, and he still couldn't believe it. He had been planning to build his family a house just like his brothers had done somewhere else on the ranch, but money had been a huge hindrance since he'd started supporting Minnie's family. The relief he felt in that precise moment was unexplainable. "I don't know what to say to you all," he said, fighting back tears. "You don't have to say anything. Just accept the gift," Storm said as he walked towards his brother and hugged him tightly. Their parents would have been very proud of all their sons had they been alive, Storm thought. Later that evening, Minnie congratulated her husband for the far he had come to turn his life around. She had watched him become a better man, and she couldn't wait for when they would visit her parents. She was sure they were going to love him instantly. "You hadn't been very wrong, my love," Minnie said to Luke. He looked at her perplexed. "Wrong about what?" he asked. "You wished for the house to be yours, and now it is," she said, smiling. "That's true. I never expected such kindness from my brothers. I regret everything I made them go through," he answered, the weight of his guilt evident on his slumped shoulders. "Don't be too hard on yourself. It seems that they have forgiven you, and now you need to start forgiving yourself," she reassured him. She then walked over to him and wrapped her arms around him. Chapter 15. Luke's ranch grew very fast, and within no time it had become one of the most profitable in Colorado. He was now a major distributor of milk and beef products in and around Colorado as well as out of state. He was now able to support Minnie's family without feeling the pinch, and he was in the process of buying them a better house in Chicago. The naysayers around Colorado had nothing much to say, and most of them were embarrassed that they had thought so little of him. He had just arrived back home one evening when his wife met him at the door looking excited. "I have finally thought of a way of supporting my family without putting too much pressure on our finances," she gushed. "I'd love to hear all about it. May I have a seat first?" he said. "Oh, of course, darling. I'm just too excited," she said as she led him to the couch. She sat down next to him, and making sure he had all his attention, she started talking. "I think we should buy William's creamery. He's unable to keep it afloat as it is," she said. "Go on," he urged her on, now all ears. "You are one of the top milk products distributors. We could sell those at the creamery. For labor, we will hire my lazy brothers. That way, they will learn how to earn a decent living and stop depending on my aging parents," she explained. Luke didn't have to think a lot about Minnie's idea. It was brilliant. He had been so busy with work that he had forgotten all about William's stalled creamery. He hoped the money William received from the sale would be channeled towards a profitable idea. He would be there to guide William should he need his help. They sent a note to William expressing their wish to buy his creamery, and he had been more than happy to sell. They planned on traveling to Chicago when there wasn't too much work around the ranch. "Would you have thought this was possible a while back?" Minnie asked Luke as they sat at their favorite spot by the fireplace in the evening. "I never thought I would ever receive any forgiveness from my brothers," he said. "I now realize why their forgiveness meant so much to you," she said. "Why do you think it did?" Luke asked. "It has brought out the best of you." "You couldn't have managed all you have without their forgiveness," she said. "You are right. Their forgiveness has restored my life back. I have everything I would ever need or wish for," he said as he drew her even closer to him. "I feel the same way. I would never exchange what I have now for anything in the world," she answered as she snuggled up to him. They sat like that, feeling each other's warmth and knowing that this was only the beginning of a wonderful journey together to eternity. Epilogue. Minnie placed the sleeping toddler next to her on the couch, too tired to take her up to her room. Lately, all she wanted to do was to lie down and forget that there were chores that needed her attention. She couldn't understand why she was always so tired this time around. It hadn't been like that with Anne. She had sailed through the 9 months in bliss, and it was over before she knew it. Even now, at almost 2 years, Anne was the most gracious child. She napped on time and was not fussy during meals. "I wish I could help you carry this one," Luke said as he walked into the house to find his wife sprawled on the couch next to their sleeping daughter. "I wish you could. I must be carrying a little terror from the way I feel," she moaned. "Boys are usually like that," Luke said, a serious look on his face sending Minnie into pearls of laughter. "And how would you know?" she asked him when her laughter subsided. "It's what they say out there," he replied. Their life had finally come together just like they had envisioned. Luke was now the proud owner of a profitable creamery in Chicago, and combined with the money the ranch made every year, he was one of the richest people in Colorado. He was very generous and made sure that none of his family members ever wanted for anything. William and his brothers had finally moved out of their parents' home, and Luke had employed housekeepers to make sure that Mr. and Mrs. Andrews were well taken care of. He had tried to get Minnie to accept a housekeeper, but his stubborn wife would hear none of it. She preferred doing all the chores around the house no matter how tired she was. "I'm traveling to Chicago on Friday. We are introducing a new product in the creamery, and I must be there to oversee the process," he said, a hint of sadness in his voice to have to leave her alone at this time. "Don't worry, we will be fine. I knew when we bought the creamery that we would have to make sacrifices. This is one of those times," she reassured him. He rubbed his wife's protruding belly and then placed his head on it. "What are you doing?" Minnie asked, amused. "I'm pleading with him to wait until I come back so we can welcome him home together," he answered and placed his head right back on her belly. "You are totally convinced that it is a boy?" she asked skeptically. "Yes, I am," he answered. "We will have to wait to find out now, won't we?" she insisted. "Okay," he answered as he placed his head back on Minnie's tummy, and she, in turn, ran her fingers slowly through his sandy hair. Everything was perfect. The end.